The dirt beneath Penelope Whitmore's fingernails had become so familiar she barely noticed the sting anymore. But the late afternoon sun beating down on her back made every movement feel like dragging stones through mud. She knelt in the small plot behind the weathered cabin, clawing at the hard Montana earth with fingers that had long ago stopped bleeding but never quite healed, searching for potatoes that might keep her alive another week. The year was 1882, and Dillon was a town that had seen better days, though Penelope could not remember when those days might have been for her. Her husband had been dead 3 months now, killed in a mine collapse that had taken 7 other men with him. The mining company had given the widows nothing but condolences and empty promises, and Penelope had quickly learned that sympathy bought no flour and paid no debts. Thomas had left her with this cabin, this struggling potato patch, and a mountain of bills that seemed to grow taller every time she closed her eyes. At 22 years old, she had expected a different life entirely. The potatoes were small this year, stunted by the dry summer and her inability to properly tend them. Without tools, the work took 3 times as long and yielded half the results. Thomas had owned a spade and a hoe once, but she had sold them 2 months back to pay for his burial. It had seemed important at the time to lay him to rest properly, to give him a marker that bore his name. Now, as her fingers scraped against a rock buried deep in the soil, she wondered if he would have preferred she keep the tools and let the earth take him unmarked. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly upon her. Penelope looked up sharply, squinting against the sun, and saw a rider dismounting near her fence. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work, and he wore the dusty clothes of a man who spent more time in the saddle than out of it. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across a face that looked to be weathered by sun and wind but not unkind. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he approached. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had probably been born further south. "I hope I am not intruding. I was passing by and I could not help but notice you seemed to be having some difficulty there." Penelope sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dress was stained with dirt and sweat, her hair had come loose from its pins hours ago, and her hands were caked with mud. She felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "I am managing just fine, thank you," she said, hearing the defensive edge in her own voice. She had learned in these past months that charity often came with strings attached, and she was wary of strangers bearing kindness. The man took another step closer, and she could see his face more clearly now. He had dark eyes that seemed genuinely concerned, and a strong jaw that was shadowed with a few days of stubble. There was something honest about his expression that made her hesitation waver just slightly. "I do not mean to offend," he said carefully, "but it looks like you are digging with your bare hands. That must be hard going." "I sold my tools," Penelope said bluntly. There seemed little point in pretending otherwise when the evidence was literally written in the dirt beneath her fingernails. "My husband died in the spring. The tools paid for his burial." Something shifted in the man's expression, a softening around the eyes that looked like genuine sympathy rather than pity. "I am sorry for your loss," he said. "My name is Aaron Dalton. I have a ranch about 10 miles west of here. I came into town for supplies and I am heading back now." "Penelope Whitmore," she replied, because it seemed rude not to give her name when he had offered his. "And I appreciate your concern, Mr. Dalton, but I do not need any help." Aaron Dalton looked at her for a long moment, then at the small pile of potatoes she had managed to excavate, then back at her. "Mrs. Whitmore, I mean no disrespect, but you are going to tear your hands to pieces before you get that whole plot dug up. And winter is coming sooner than you think up here." Penelope felt her jaw tighten. She knew he was right, but admitting it felt like admitting defeat. "I will manage," she repeated. "I am sure you will," Aaron said, "but there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered." "I need to go into the general store anyway. Let me pick up a spade and a hoe for you. Consider it a neighborly gesture." "I cannot pay you back," Penelope said flatly, "if that is what you are expecting." "I am not expecting anything," Aaron said, and there was a firmness in his voice that made her believe him. "I have been fortunate in my life, Mrs. Whitmore. My ranch is doing well. I can afford to help a neighbor in need, and I would like to do so. No strings attached." Penelope wanted to refuse. Pride was one of the few things she had left, and it felt precious and necessary. But her hands were aching, and she had only managed to dig up perhaps a quarter of what she needed to harvest before the first frost came. If she did not get these potatoes out of the ground soon, she would have nothing to eat come winter. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" she asked quietly. Aaron was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My mother raised me and my two sisters on her own after my father died when I was 12. It was in Texas, and the land was different, but the struggle was the same. I watched her work herself to the bone trying to keep us fed and clothed. Neighbors helped us when they could, and I swore when I grew up that I would pay that kindness forward whenever I had the chance. So that is what I am doing." There was something in the way he said it that convinced Penelope he was telling the truth. She looked down at her ruined hands, then back up at this stranger who was offering her exactly what she needed with no apparent expectation of recompense. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I would appreciate the help." Aaron smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and more approachable. "I will be right back," he said. "Do not work too hard while I am gone." He mounted his horse with an easy grace and rode off toward the center of town, leaving Penelope alone in her garden once more. She sat there in the dirt, feeling strange and uncertain. It had been so long since anyone had offered her genuine kindness that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. True to his word, Aaron returned within the hour. He was carrying not just a spade and a hoe, but also a pair of work gloves that looked new. He dismounted and brought them over to her, holding them out with that same gentle expression. "These too," he said. "Your hands have been through enough." Penelope took the gloves with trembling fingers. They were soft leather, well made, and probably cost more than she wanted to think about. "Mr. Dalton, this is too much." "It is exactly enough," Aaron said. "Now, if you will allow me, I would like to help you with the digging. I have some time before I need to get back to the ranch, and this will go much faster with two people working." "You do not have to do that," Penelope protested. "You have already done more than enough." "I know I do not have to," Aaron said, "but I would like to, unless you would prefer I leave." Penelope looked at him, at his honest face and patient expression, and felt something crack open in her chest. "No," she said softly. "I would not prefer that, thank you." Aaron grinned and picked up the spade. "All right then. Show me where you want me to start." They worked together as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. Aaron dug with the steady efficiency of a man used to hard labor, turning over the earth in neat rows while Penelope followed behind him with the hoe, breaking up the larger clods and searching for potatoes. It was still hard work, but with proper tools and an extra pair of hands, it felt almost manageable. They fell into an easy rhythm, and after a while, Aaron started talking. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the horses he bred. He spoke with obvious pride about the land he had worked for years to build into something sustainable. Penelope found herself listening with genuine interest, asking questions about things she had never thought much about before. "How did you end up in Montana?" she asked as she pulled a particularly large potato from the earth and added it to their growing pile. "I came up here about 6 years ago," Aaron said, pausing to wipe sweat from his forehead. "After my mother passed, there was not much keeping me in Texas. My sisters had both married and moved away, and I wanted to start fresh somewhere new. I had heard there was good ranching land up here, and I had saved enough money to buy a small parcel. I have been building it up ever since. You ever get lonely out there?" Penelope asked, then immediately felt her face flush. "I am sorry, that is too personal a question." "No, it is all right," Aaron said. "And yes, sometimes I do. It is a big house for one person and the ranch hands live in the bunkhouse, so I do not see them much outside of work. But I keep busy, and that helps." They continued working as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Penelope could not remember the last time she had felt this almost comfortable in someone's presence. Aaron did not press her with questions about her own life or her circumstances. He simply worked beside her, offering help without making her feel pitied. By the time the light began to fade, they had harvested nearly all of the potatoes. The pile was larger than Penelope had dared hope, enough to keep her fed through the winter if she was careful. She stood looking at it, feeling something dangerously close to hope stirring in her chest. "That should do it for today," Aaron said, leaning on the spade. "You can finish up the last bit tomorrow in the daylight." "I do not know how to thank you," Penelope said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "This would have taken me weeks on my own." "You do not need to thank me," Aaron said. "I was glad to help." He hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope this does not seem too forward, but if you ever need anything else, my ranch is not far. You would be welcome to come by any time." Penelope met his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there. "I appreciate that, Mr. Dalton, truly." "Aaron," he said. "Please just call me Aaron." "Then you should call me Penelope," she replied. Aaron smiled that transformative smile again. "All right, Penelope. I should head back before it gets full dark. Will you be all right here?" "I will be fine," Penelope said. "Thank you again, Aaron, for everything." He tipped his hat to her, mounted his horse, and rode off into the gathering dusk. Penelope stood in her garden, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, and felt something she had not felt in months. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this. Over the next few weeks, Aaron found reasons to come by Penelope's cabin. Sometimes he brought supplies he claimed he had extra of, a sack of flour here, some salt pork there. Other times he simply stopped to check on her, to make sure she was managing all right. Penelope knew she should probably discourage these visits, knew that people in town might talk, but she found herself looking forward to seeing him with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. It had been so long since Thomas died, but sometimes she still felt guilty for the way her heart lifted when she saw Aaron riding up the path. Thomas had been a good husband in his way, steady and reliable if not particularly passionate. Their marriage had been born of practicality more than romance. He had needed a wife, and she had needed security. They had been fond of each other, certainly, but Penelope could not honestly say she had been in love with him. What she was beginning to feel for Aaron was entirely different. It crept up on her slowly, in the way he always asked about her day with genuine interest, in the careful way he never presumed too much or pushed too hard. He treated her with a respect that made her feel seen as a person rather than just a widow to be pitied. One crisp October morning, Aaron arrived with a wagon full of firewood. Penelope came out of the cabin wiping her hands on her apron and stopped short at the sight. "Aaron, what is all this?" she asked. "Firewood," he said, jumping down from the wagon seat. "Winter comes hard up here, and I noticed your woodpile was looking pretty low. I had some extra cut, so I thought I would bring it by." You did not have extra cut, Penelope said, but she was smiling despite herself. You cut this for me. Aaron had the grace to look slightly sheepish. All right, you caught me. But I wanted to make sure you would be warm this winter. Will you let me stack it for you? Penelope wanted to protest, to insist that he had already done too much, but the truth was she had been worrying about firewood. Cutting it herself with only a small hatchet would have been back-breaking work, and she was not sure she could have managed enough to last through the cold months. Yes, she said softly. Thank you. They worked together to stack the wood against the side of the cabin, creating a neat pile that would indeed last her through the winter. As they worked, they talked about everything and nothing. Aaron told her funny stories about his ranch hands and the various mishaps that occurred in daily ranch life. Penelope found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since Thomas had died. You have a beautiful laugh, Aaron said suddenly, and then looked surprised at himself for saying it out loud. Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. I have not had much occasion to use it lately, she admitted. I am glad I could give you a reason, Aaron said. His eyes were warm as he looked at her, and Penelope felt her breath catch in her throat. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Then Aaron cleared his throat and looked away. I should probably get going. I have cattle to check on. Of course, Penelope said, trying to ignore the disappointment that washed through her. Thank you again for the firewood. Anytime, Aaron said. He mounted his horse but paused before riding off. Penelope, there is going to be a dance in town next Saturday night. I know it might be too soon, but I would be honored if you would allow me to escort you. Penelope's first instinct was to refuse. It had only been a few months since Thomas died. What would people say if they saw her at a dance with another man? But as she looked up at Aaron, at the hope and uncertainty in his expression, she found she did not care what people might say. I would like that, she said. Yes, I will go with you. Aaron's face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. Saturday evening, then. I will come by around 6 if that suits you. That would be perfect, Penelope said. She watched him ride away, then went back into her cabin and leaned against the closed door. Her heart was pounding, and she felt like a girl again, nervous and excited about the prospect of a dance with a handsome man. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Penelope had only one good dress, the one she had worn to Thomas's funeral, and she spent hours carefully altering it to look less somber. She took in the waist a bit, added a ribbon at the collar, and did her best to make it look festive rather than funereal. When Saturday evening arrived, she was as ready as she was going to be. Aaron arrived promptly at 6, driving a small buggy rather than riding his horse. He was cleaned up and dressed in what were obviously his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his jaw freshly shaven. When Penelope opened the door, his eyes widened appreciatively. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you, Penelope replied, feeling her cheeks warm. You look very handsome yourself. He helped her up into the buggy and they set off toward town. The evening was cool but clear, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Penelope found herself acutely aware of Aaron sitting beside her, of the warmth of his presence and the easy way he handled the reins. Are you nervous? He asked after a few minutes of comfortable silence. A little, Penelope admitted. I have not been to a social gathering since the funeral. I am not sure how people will react to seeing me there with you. If anyone says anything unkind, we will leave immediately, Aaron said firmly. I will not have you subjected to gossip or judgment. You deserve to have some joy in your life, Penelope. Anyone who thinks otherwise can answer to me. His protectiveness made her feel warm and safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. Thank you, Aaron. That means a great deal to me." The dance was being held in the town hall, and they could hear the music before they even arrived. Aaron helped Penelope down from the buggy and offered her his arm. She took it, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. As they entered the hall, Penelope felt several pairs of eyes turn their way. She saw Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, lean over to whisper something to Mrs. Cooper, and both women looked at her with expressions that could have been curiosity or disapproval or both. But before Penelope could feel too uncomfortable, Aaron squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm and led her further into the room. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Yes," Penelope said, and let him lead her onto the floor. Dancing with Aaron was nothing like dancing with Thomas had been. Thomas had been competent but perfunctory, moving through the steps with the same workmanlike efficiency he brought to everything else. Aaron danced like he had been born to it, guiding her smoothly through the turns and steps with a natural grace that made her feel light as air. His hand was warm and firm on her waist, and when she looked up at him, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "You are staring," she said, trying to sound teasing rather than breathless. "I cannot help it," Aaron replied. "You are the most beautiful woman in this room." "You are biased," Penelope said, but she was smiling. "Perhaps," Aaron agreed, "but that does not make it any less true." They danced 3 songs in a row before taking a break to get some punch. As they stood by the refreshment table, they were approached by a young couple that Penelope recognized as the Millers, who owned a small farm on the other side of town. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mrs. Miller said warmly. "It is so good to see you out and about. You look lovely this evening." "Thank you," Penelope said, surprised and touched by the genuine friendliness in the other woman's voice. "You know Mr. Dalton? We have met a few times," Aaron said, shaking Mr. Miller's hand. "You folks have that farm with the excellent apple trees, if I remember correctly." They chatted for a few minutes about farming and ranching, and Penelope felt herself begin to relax. Not everyone was judging her. Some people, like the Millers, seemed genuinely happy to see her enjoying herself. The evening passed in a wonderful blur of music and laughter and dancing. Aaron never left her side unless she needed to visit the ladies' room, and he was attentive without being overbearing. He introduced her to several of his acquaintances, and each time he spoke about her with such respect and admiration that Penelope felt herself standing a little taller. As the night drew to a close and they made their way back to the buggy, Penelope realized she felt happier than she had in months, maybe years. Aaron helped her up and took his place beside her, guiding the horse back toward her cabin under a sky now thick with stars. "Did you have a good time?" Aaron asked. "I had a wonderful time," Penelope said honestly. "Thank you for asking me, Aaron. I needed this more than I realized." "I am glad," Aaron said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Penelope, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right words for weeks now, but I am not sure there are right words for this kind of thing." Penelope felt her heart begin to pound. "What is it?" "I care about you," Aaron said, his voice low and sincere. "More than I probably should after such a short acquaintance. From the moment I saw you digging in that garden with your bare hands, so determined and proud despite everything you had been through, I felt something shift inside me. These past weeks, getting to know you, have only made those feelings stronger. I know it is soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. I am falling in love with you, Penelope." Penelope sat in stunned silence for a moment, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to protest that it was too soon, that she was not ready, that she could not possibly feel the same way. But that would be a lie. The truth was that she had been falling for Aaron too, slowly and surely, with every kind gesture and warm smile and moment of genuine connection. I care about you too, she said softly. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is too soon or not appropriate, but the truth is that I look forward to your visits more than anything else in my life right now. You make me feel alive again, Aaron. You make me feel like maybe there is still happiness waiting for me in this world. Aaron pulled the buggy to a stop in front of her cabin and turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and full of emotion. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Penelope whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Penelope felt something inside her that had been locked away for far too long finally break free. She kissed him back with a fervor that surprised them both, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Aaron rested his forehead against hers, his hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right, Penelope. Will you let me?" "Yes," Penelope said, and she was smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes, Aaron, I would like that very much." Over the following months, Aaron became a fixture in Penelope's life. He came by several times a week, sometimes bringing supplies or helping with chores around the cabin, but often just to spend time with her. They would sit by her fire in the evenings, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Aaron told her about his childhood in Texas, about the hard years after his father died, and how his mother had worked herself to exhaustion to keep the family afloat. Penelope shared her own story, about growing up in a family with too many children and not enough money, about marrying Thomas more out of necessity than love. "I feel guilty sometimes," she admitted one evening as they sat side by side on her small porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Thomas was a good man, and he deserved better than a wife who married him for security rather than love. You gave him companionship and loyalty," Aaron said gently. "That is not nothing, Penelope. You have nothing to feel guilty about." "I know," Penelope said, "but with you it is so different. What I feel for you is nothing like what I felt for Thomas, and that makes me realize what I denied him by not being able to give him more." Aaron took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Thomas is at peace now, and I am sure if he could speak, he would want you to be happy. You cannot spend your life feeling guilty for feelings you could not control. All you can do is move forward and embrace what life offers you now." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. "When did you become so wise?" "I have had a lot of time alone to think," Aaron said with a soft laugh. "Too much time, probably, but it taught me not to waste opportunities when they come along. And you, Penelope Whitmore, are an opportunity I have no intention of wasting." As winter settled over Montana in earnest, Aaron insisted that Penelope spend more time at his ranch. At first, she resisted, worried about propriety and what people might say. But Aaron pointed out that his housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had worked for him for 3 years, lived in a room off the kitchen and served as a more than adequate chaperone. The first time Penelope saw Aaron's ranch, she was struck by how beautiful it was. The main house was larger than she had imagined, a well-built structure with a wide porch that looked out over rolling fields. Inside, it was comfortably furnished, but had the slightly bare feeling of a house that lacked a woman's touch. "It is a bit sparse," Aaron admitted as he showed her around. "I have never been much for decorating. I tend to focus more on the practical aspects of things." "It has good bones," Penelope said, running her hand along the smooth banister of the staircase. "It just needs some warmth, some personal touches." "Maybe you could help me with that," Aaron said, and there was something hopeful in his voice that made Penelope's heart flutter. "Maybe I could," she agreed. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a cheerful woman in her 50s who took an immediate liking to Penelope. "It is about time Mr. Dalton found himself a good woman," she declared over dinner that first night. "This house has been far too quiet for far too long." Aaron and Penelope began spending their Sundays together at the ranch. She would arrive after church services and stay through the afternoon, often helping Mrs. Patterson prepare dinner. It gave them time together in a more relaxed setting than her small cabin allowed, and Penelope found herself becoming increasingly comfortable in the space. She started bringing little touches of her own: a tablecloth for the dining table, some dried flowers for the mantel. Aaron watched her make these small changes with undisguised pleasure. "You belong here," he told her one Sunday afternoon as they sat in his parlor. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and outside, snow was beginning to fall in soft, lazy flakes. "This house comes alive when you are in it." Penelope looked around the room, at the warm glow of the lamps and the comfortable furniture, and felt a longing so intense it almost hurt. She could imagine a life here, a real life, full of love and laughter and purpose. "I could be happy here," she said quietly. "With you." Aaron moved closer to her on the sofa, taking both her hands in his. "Marry me, Penelope. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you, right here on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you. Please say you will marry me." Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Aaron, I will marry you." Aaron let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, and when she saw their faces, she let out a delighted laugh. "It is about time," she exclaimed. "I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to ask her, Mr. Dalton." "I had to make sure she would say yes," Aaron said, grinning. "As if there was ever any doubt," Mrs. Patterson said with a knowing smile. They were married in early spring, just as the snow was beginning to melt and the first green shoots were pushing up through the earth. The ceremony was held in the small church in Dillon, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a new dress that Aaron had insisted on buying for her, a beautiful cream-colored gown with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Aaron wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Penelope felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Penelope thought about how much her life had changed in less than a year. She had been so lost when Aaron found her, so certain that survival was the best she could hope for. Now she was walking toward a future full of promise and love, toward a man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Aaron kissed her, Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception that followed was a joyful affair, with dancing and food and well wishes from friends and neighbors. Even some of the people who had whispered about her at that first dance came forward to congratulate them, and Penelope found she could forgive their earlier judgment. That night, Aaron carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, which was now her home too. Mrs. Patterson had discreetly retired to her room, leaving them alone. Aaron set Penelope down gently in the parlor and cupped her face in his hands. "Mrs. Dalton," he said softly, trying out her new name. "My wife, my husband," Penelope replied, and the word felt right on her tongue. "Aaron, I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me," Aaron said. "I could never regret this," Penelope said. "You saved me, Aaron. not just from poverty or hardship, but from a life without love. You taught me that I deserved more than just survival. You taught me to hope again. You saved me too, Aaron said. I did not even realize how lonely I was until I met you. You brought light and warmth and laughter into my life. You made this house into a home. They stood there in the soft lamplight, holding each other, and Penelope felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This was where she was meant to be. This was the life she was meant to live. Their first year of marriage was full of joy and adjustment. Penelope threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, adding curtains to the windows and rugs to the floors, and all the small touches that transformed a functional space into something warm and inviting. She also learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising early to help Aaron with morning chores, and spending her days tending to the large vegetable garden she planted behind the house. The garden was her special pride. With proper tools and Aaron's help in preparing the soil, she was able to grow not just potatoes but carrots and beans and squash and a dozen other vegetables. She canned what they could not eat fresh, lining the shelves of the root cellar with rows of glass jars that would see them through the winter. Every time she looked at those jars, she remembered the desperation of digging for potatoes with her bare hands and felt grateful for how far she had come. Aaron was everything a husband should be, attentive and affectionate and respectful. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinion even though she was still learning about cattle and horses. He never made her feel less than his equal, and in return, she gave him all the love and support she had to offer. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about their day. Sometimes Aaron would pull out his harmonica and play while Penelope sang along, her voice clear and sweet in the gathering darkness. Those were the moments Penelope treasured most, the quiet intimacy of simply being together. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them confined to the house for days at a time. But Penelope found she did not mind. She had Aaron and Mrs. Patterson for company, a warm fire, and plenty of food stored away. They played cards and read books aloud to each other and made plans for the spring. When the snows finally melted and the world began to green again, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Aaron one morning in early March, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still for a moment, his eyes widening, and then a smile spread across his face so wide and joyful that Penelope felt tears spring to her own eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Penelope said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Sometime in October, I think." Aaron swept her up in his arms and spun her around, then immediately set her down again with a worried expression. "I am sorry. I should not have done that. Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should I fetch the doctor?" "I am fine," Penelope assured him, amused by his sudden anxiety. "I am going to have a baby, not shatter like glass. You do not need to treat me like I am fragile." "You are carrying my child," Aaron said, resting his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "That makes you the most precious thing in the world to me. I am going to worry, Penelope. You might as well get used to it." True to his word, Aaron fussed over her for the entire pregnancy. He insisted she not do any heavy lifting and followed her around trying to take over tasks he deemed too strenuous. Penelope found it equal parts touching and exasperating, but she loved him for his concern even when she had to firmly tell him to stop hovering. As her belly grew and the baby's arrival drew nearer, Penelope found herself thinking often about the future. She and Aaron talked about names and where to put the nursery and all the 1,000 little details involved in preparing for a child. But more than that, they talked about the kind of parents they wanted to be and the kind of life they wanted to give this child. "I want our children to know they are loved," Aaron said one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "I want them to grow up feeling safe and secure, never wondering if they will have enough to eat or whether their parents will be there for them." "They will have all of that," Penelope promised. "We will make sure of it." The baby arrived on a crisp October afternoon, exactly 2 years after Aaron had first come upon Penelope digging in her garden. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Penelope thought she could not bear it anymore. But Aaron stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When the baby finally came into the world with a lusty cry, the doctor announced, "You have a son." Aaron's face was wet with tears as he looked down at the tiny, wrinkled infant the doctor placed in Penelope's arms. "A son," he said wonderingly. "We have a son. What should we name him?" Penelope asked, exhausted but blissfully happy. "James," Aaron said without hesitation, "after my father, if that is all right with you." "James Dalton," Penelope said, trying out the name. "It is perfect." Little James was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to have inherited his father's easy temperament. He ate well and slept reasonably and gazed up at his parents with dark eyes that looked remarkably alert for an infant. Aaron was completely besotted with his son, spending hours just holding him and staring at him in wonder. "I cannot believe we made this," he said one evening, cradling James against his chest while the baby slept. "This perfect little person is ours." "He is pretty wonderful," Penelope agreed, watching her husband and son with a fullness in her heart that felt almost too much to contain. The months after James's birth were busy and exhausting but full of joy. Penelope learned how to balance caring for a baby with managing the household and helping with the ranch when she could. Aaron hired an additional ranch hand to help with the workload so he could spend more time with his family. Mrs. Patterson proved to be an invaluable help, taking over many of the household tasks so Penelope could focus on James. As James grew from a baby into a toddler, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and adventurous, always getting into things he should not and exploring every corner of the ranch he could reach. He had his father's smile and his mother's determination, and both Penelope and Aaron agreed he was the most brilliant child who had ever lived. When James was almost 2, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news came with less surprise and more calm acceptance. They knew what to expect now, and Aaron, while still worried, was slightly less inclined to treat Penelope like she might break at any moment. Their daughter arrived the following spring, a tiny thing with wisps of dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire household. They named her Alina, after Aaron's mother, and she proved to be as strong-willed as her grandmother had reportedly been. Where James had been an easy baby, Alina was demanding and particular, and Penelope often joked that she was getting her revenge for all the times she had thought parenting was manageable. But even the sleepless nights and constant demands could not diminish the happiness Penelope felt when she looked at her growing family. Aaron was a devoted father, patient and playful with the children. He would come in from the fields and immediately scoop them up, listening to James's excited chatter about his day and rocking Alina when she was fussy. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. James learned to ride a horse before he turned 4, sitting proudly in front of his father on the saddle. Alina grew into a fierce little girl who insisted on helping with everything and threw spectacular tantrums when she was told she was too small. They had another son when James was 5 and Alina was 3. A quiet, thoughtful boy they named Samuel, who seemed content to observe the world around him with solemn eyes. The ranch prospered under Aaron's careful management, growing larger and more successful with each passing year. He hired more men, built a larger barn, and expanded his cattle herd. Penelope continued to tend her garden, which had grown to include an herb garden and a small orchard of apple trees. She sold her preserves and vegetables at the general store in town, taking pride in contributing to the family finances even though Aaron always insisted it was not necessary. On their 10th anniversary, Aaron surprised Penelope with a trip to Helena, just the two of them. Mrs. Patterson stayed with the children, and they spent 3 wonderful days exploring the city, eating in restaurants and staying in a hotel that felt impossibly fancy compared to their usual life. On their last evening, as they sat in a nice restaurant waiting for their dinner to arrive, Aaron reached across the table and took her hand. "You remember the day we met?" he asked. "Of course I do," Penelope said. "You found me digging for potatoes with my bare hands like some kind of desperate animal." "You were not desperate," Aaron said firmly. "You were determined. You were doing whatever you had to do to survive, and there was a strength in that which took my breath away. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, I think." "I was so suspicious of you at first," Penelope admitted. "I could not understand why you would want to help me. I had gotten so used to the idea that I had to do everything alone." "You never have to be alone again," Aaron said. "I know I have told you that before, but I want you to know I mean it just as much today as I did 10 years ago. More, even. You are my partner, Penelope. My love. My life. Everything good in my world exists because of you." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. When I was digging in that garden, all I could think about was survival. I could not see past the next meal or the next bill. You showed me there was so much more possible. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything, Aaron." "We gave each other everything," Aaron corrected gently. "That is what marriage is supposed to be. 2 people building something together that is better than what either could have built alone." They toasted to their 10 years together and to all the years still to come. When they returned to the ranch, the children rushed to greet them, and Penelope felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she was living. It was not always easy. There were hard days and difficult seasons and moments when she felt overwhelmed by the demands of running a household and raising children. But it was good. It was so incredibly good. More years passed. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and made it clear he intended to take over operations someday. Eleanor, true to her fierce nature, declared she wanted to be a teacher and began pestering her parents about sending her to the school in Helena when she was old enough. Samuel remained quiet and thoughtful, showing an early aptitude for working with horses that delighted Aaron. Penelope and Aaron added one more child to their family when Eleanor was 8. A surprise daughter they named Rose, who arrived with a shock of red hair unlike anyone else in the family. She was a sunny, cheerful child who seemed to find joy in everything, and she quickly became the pet of her older siblings. As Penelope approached 40, she sometimes found herself standing in her garden, looking out over the land that had become so familiar and beloved, and marveling at the journey her life had taken. The scared, desperate woman who had been digging for potatoes with her bare hands seemed like a different person entirely, someone from another lifetime. But she had not forgotten those dark days. She remembered the fear and the hunger and the bone-deep exhaustion. She remembered what it felt like to believe that survival was the best she could hope for. And she remembered the moment Aaron had ridden into her life and offered her not just tools, but hope. Aaron came up behind her one afternoon as she stood lost in thought among the rows of vegetables. He wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just how lucky I am," Penelope said, leaning back against him. "How lucky we are." "I am the lucky one," Aaron said. "I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You gave my life meaning and purpose. You gave me a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime." "We built it together," Penelope said, echoing his words from years before. "Everything we have, we created together." "That is the truth," Aaron agreed. He turned her in his arms so he could look at her face. Even after all these years, his eyes still held the same warmth and love they had from the very beginning. "I love you, Penelope Dalton. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Penelope said. "More than I can ever properly express." They stood there in the garden, holding each other as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Around them, the sounds of the ranch provided a familiar soundtrack: cattle lowing in the distance, chickens clucking in their coop, the laughter of their children playing somewhere nearby. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life well lived. As the years continued to unfold, Penelope and Aaron settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long and happy marriage. Their children grew and began to forge their own paths. James took on more responsibility at the ranch, working side by side with his father and learning everything there was to know about running the operation. At 20, he married a sweet girl from town named Catherine, and they built a house on the far side of the ranch property. Within a year, they made Aaron and Penelope grandparents for the first time with the birth of a daughter they named Alice. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Penelope was overwhelmed with emotion. She thought about her own mother, who had died when Penelope was just 17, and wished she could have known these children and grandchildren. But mostly she felt grateful. Grateful that she had survived the hard years. Grateful that Aaron had found her when she needed him most. Grateful for every moment of this beautiful life she had been given. Eleanor did indeed go to school in Helena, and she proved to be an excellent student. She came home for holidays and summers, full of stories about her studies and her plans for the future. At 19, she accepted a teaching position in a small town about 50 miles away. Though Penelope missed her fiercely, she was proud of her daughter's independence and determination. Samuel, as predicted, had a gift with horses. He started breeding and training them, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest mounts in Montana. People came from all over to buy horses from Samuel Dalton, and Aaron beamed with pride every time someone complimented his son's work. Rose, the baby of the family, grew into a lovely young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's easy charm. She was in no hurry to marry or leave home, content to help her mother with the household and the garden, and to spend time with her growing collection of nieces and nephews. As Aaron and Penelope entered their 50s, they began to slow down a bit. Aaron turned over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch to James, though he still rode out to check on things most days. Penelope's garden remained her domain, though she was grateful for Rose's help with the heavier work. They spent more time simply being together, sitting on the porch in the evenings and watching the sun set, just as they had done for decades. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Penelope asked one evening. "If you had not stopped that day when you saw me in the garden, all the time," Aaron admitted. "And it terrifies me to think I almost did not stop. I was in a hurry to get home, and I nearly just rode past. But something made me look twice, made me see you there struggling. I have thanked God 1,000 times that I listened to that impulse." I used to wonder what I did to deserve losing Thomas and ending up in such desperate circumstances, Penelope said. Now I wonder what I did to deserve you, to deserve all of this. We deserve to be happy, Aaron said firmly. Both of us. We have worked hard and loved well and tried our best to be good people. That is enough, Penelope. That is more than enough. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party at the ranch. The house was full of people, children and grandchildren and friends they had accumulated over the decades. There was food and music and laughter, and Penelope felt so full of joy she thought she might overflow with it. James stood up to give a toast, and the room fell quiet. My parents, he began, his voice thick with emotion, have shown me what real love looks like. It is not just the grand gestures or the romantic moments, though there have been plenty of those. It is the everyday kindness. It is the way my father still brings my mother flowers from the garden every week. It is the way my mother still makes my father's favorite pie, even though he is supposed to be watching his sugar intake. It is the way they look at each other across a crowded room and smile like they are the only two people in the world. They taught us that love is a choice you make every day, and they have chosen each other every single day for 30 years. We are all here because of that choice, and we are all better people because of their example. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished. Aaron pulled Penelope close and kissed her forehead, and she felt his tears mix with her own. 30 years, he murmured against her hair. And it still feels like not enough time. I want 30 more. I want 100 more. We will take whatever time we are given, Penelope said, and we will make every moment count. They danced that night, moving slowly to music played by Samuel on his fiddle. Penelope rested her head on Aaron's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the woman she had been, digging in the dirt with broken hands and a broken spirit. She thought about the man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her not pity but respect. She thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick and day by day. As they swayed together in the warm glow of lamplight, surrounded by the family they had created, Penelope understood that this was what true wealth looked like. Not money or land or possessions, but this. Love freely given and joyfully received. Children who had grown into good adults. A home filled with laughter and memories. A partner who still made her heart skip a beat after 3 decades. The years continued to be kind to them. They grew old together gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts remaining sharp. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, and their house was often full of the sounds of young children playing. Aaron still rode out to check on the ranch operations, until he was nearly 70, only stopping when a fall from his horse left him with a broken leg that took longer to heal than it should have. Penelope tended him with patient devotion during his recovery, and Aaron joked that she was getting her revenge for all the times he had fussed over her during her pregnancies. But underneath the teasing, there was a new awareness of their mortality, a recognition that their time together, while blessed, was not infinite. I am not afraid of dying, Aaron told her one night as they lay in bed, but I am afraid of leaving you. I cannot bear the thought of you being alone. I will not be alone, Penelope assured him. We have 4 children, a dozen grandchildren, and a whole extended family who loves me. And besides, you are not going anywhere for a long time yet. You are too stubborn to leave me. Aaron laughed, and Penelope felt some of the tension leave his body. That is true enough. I am far too stubborn. They were blessed with several more years together, years in which they celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and watched their family continue to grow. They took walks together when the weather was nice, moving slowly but still hand in hand. They sat together in the garden Penelope had tended for so many years, and Aaron would tell her she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. On a warm September afternoon, when Aaron was 73 and Penelope was 71, they sat together on the porch as the sun began to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. Aaron had his arm around Penelope, and she was leaned against him, comfortable and content. "You remember the first time we sat here together like this?" Aaron asked. "I do," Penelope said. "I was so nervous. I could not believe a man like you wanted to court a woman like me." "A woman like you," Aaron repeated with a soft laugh. "The strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I had ever met. I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were special." "You saved my life," Penelope said quietly. "In every way that matters." "We saved each other," Aaron corrected. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for saying yes when I asked to buy you those tools. Thank you for letting me into your life. Thank you for marrying me and building this family with me. Thank you for every day we have had together. It has been the greatest honor of my life to be your husband." Penelope turned to look at him, and what she saw in his face made her throat tight with emotion. "The honor was mine," she said. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. You taught me what love really means. I would not trade a single moment of our life together." They sat there as the sun sank below the mountains, holding each other close. Around them, the ranch was settling in for the evening, cattle finding their resting places and birds returning to their nests. Inside the house, Rose was preparing dinner, and the smell of cooking food drifted out to them on the evening breeze. It was an ordinary moment in an extraordinary life. It was everything Penelope had never dared to dream of during those dark days, when she had been alone and scared and digging for potatoes with her bare hands. It was proof that sometimes, even in the hardest of times, hope arrives in the form of a stranger on a horse who sees your worth and offers you a future. Aaron passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 75. Penelope woke to find him gone, his face peaceful and his hand still holding hers. She grieved deeply, as did their entire family, but she took comfort in knowing they had been blessed with a long and happy life together. At his funeral, she stood straight and strong, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she spoke about the man Aaron had been and the legacy of love he had left behind. Penelope lived for another 12 years after Aaron's death, spending her time with her family and tending her garden until the very end. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about the Wild West days, about what it had been like when Montana was still young and rough. And she always told them about the day a cowboy saw her digging in her garden and stopped to help, how that single act of kindness had changed everything. When Penelope died at 83, peacefully in her sleep, just as Aaron had, her family laid her to rest beside him in the small cemetery outside of Dillon. The headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription, "Together forever, as they always were." The ranch continued to thrive under James's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and then to theirs. The main house was maintained with loving care, and each generation added their own touches while preserving the heart of what Aaron and Penelope had built. Penelope's garden still bloomed every summer, tended by daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters who knew the stories of its origin. And sometimes, on warm autumn afternoons when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting together on the porch, hand in hand, watching the sun set over the mountains. It was probably just a trick of the light, a shadow and a memory. But those who believed in the enduring power of true love liked to think it was Aaron and Penelope, still together after all these years. still holding fast to the bond that had been forged decades ago when a desperate woman digging in the dirt met a kind man who saw her worth and offered her his heart. Their story became part of the family lore, passed down through generations as a testament to the fact that love can bloom in the unlikeliest of circumstances. That sometimes salvation comes not in grand, dramatic gestures, but in simple acts of human kindness. That two broken people can find each other and build something beautiful together. That a handful of seeds planted in hard soil can grow into something that sustains not just one season but generations to come. The potato patch where it all began was eventually incorporated into the larger garden, but a small marker was placed there by one of Penelope's great-grandchildren, a simple stone that read, "Where love took root." Visitors to the ranch would sometimes ask about it, and whoever was there would smile and say, "That is where it all started. That is where our family began." And in a way, it was true. Everything that came after, all the love and life and laughter, could be traced back to that autumn day in 1882, when a cowboy named Dalton saw a woman named Penelope Whitmore digging for potatoes with her bare hands and decided to stop and help. In that moment, neither of them could have imagined where that simple act of kindness would lead. But looking back across the decades, across all the years of joy and challenge and growth, it was clear that it had led exactly where it was meant to a life filled with love, to a family built on respect and partnership and genuine affection, to a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone, to a story that would be told and retold, inspiring others to look for opportunities to extend kindness, to see past surface circumstances to the worth of the person beneath, to take chances on connection even when logic might argue against it. Aaron and Penelope's love story was not one of grand dramatic sweeps or impossible obstacles overcome through sheer force of will. It was quieter than that, more subtle. It was built on steady commitment and daily choice, and the accumulation of 1,000 small moments of care and consideration. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership, on the understanding that each of them was better with the other than they could ever be alone. That foundation proved strong enough to support not just their own happiness, but the happiness of everyone who came after them. Their children learned from their example and built their own solid marriages. Their grandchildren grew up knowing what healthy love looked like and refused to settle for less. Their great-grandchildren and beyond carried forward the values Aaron and Penelope had embodied, creating ripples that spread further than either could have imagined. And it all started with potatoes and dirt, and two people who were brave enough to be vulnerable, to accept help when it was offered, to extend help without expectation of return. Two people who recognized in each other something precious and worth protecting. Two people who chose each other every single day and never once regretted that choice. In the end, that was the real magic of their story. Not that they found each other, though that was remarkable enough, but that they kept choosing each other through every season and circumstance for 50 years of marriage and beyond. That they built something together that was so strong and true it could weather any storm. That they loved each other so completely that even death could not diminish the bond they had forged. And so the story of the woman digging potatoes and the cowboy who stopped to help became more than just a story. It became a legacy, a testament, a promise. A reminder that love is always possible, even in the hardest of times. That kindness matters, that connections can form in unexpected places, and that sometimes the best things in life begin with the simplest of gestures. For Aaron and Penelope, it began with tools and potatoes and dirt. But it grew into something magnificent, something that would outlast them both and continue to grow and flourish long after they were gone. It grew into love in its truest and most enduring form, and that was the greatest harvest of all.